There we go. I am resident of Collinwood for YouTube, joined by Patrick McCray. Gordon, guys, how the heck are you?
I'm smooth as this pink squirrel.
Gordon?
I'm hotter than a snake's ass in a wagon rut.
We're here to talk Dark Shadows 1995. 9 episodes, guys. 9 fabulous, scary episodes. Me and Patrick had talked about this before, so we're going to start with Gordon. Gordon, what did you think of this, man?
Well, I watched the podcast right before, so I agree with everything you said. Good night, everyone.
How about that Planet of the Apes? How about Space 1999? That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, let's go really obscure. Let's talk Sapphire and Steel. A show
was something weird, like in Sapphire and Steel, like they were all in one building, or it was something strange.
Yeah,
like...
it was. We'll get to the 95 sequence. I promise me, folks, we'll get there. But yeah, it was basically they had even if Doctor Who had the equivalent of a child's allowance in terms of British TV budget, Sapphire and Steel was like looking. They found coins in the cushions, so everything was usually one set. But,
look, I found David McCallum. Isn't he in that show? He's on.
Well, actually, the funny thing is, when they hired him, they blew most of their budget. But anyway, the 1995 sequence in Dark Shadows, I actually did rewatch it just to reacquaint myself, and a couple of things that struck to me. And if you watch the previous one with just Jewel and Patrick, you're probably there'll be some spoilers. I'm sorry, but first is this is just raw atmosphere. I mean, it is just it's the show basically, and for me. And maybe it's just my own projection into it, but kind of knowing what was going on at the time that year so far, because you had Vietnam, the My Lai massacre, all sorts of stuff happening stateside, and the Beatles breaking up. I mean, it feels like a lot of that mood was seeped into the writers. I mean, I don't think it's topical. I just think it's just very oppressive, and it's really, I kind of feel like at that point the writers are saying, okay, you've watched this far. If you're staying with us, we're not holding back. I mean, this is maybe Dark Shadows at its most punk rock. Because, I mean, it literally starts, it doesn't start with the end of parallel time. Like, it's not like, oh, hey, we're done. It's like they're trying to get, they're in the room, sets on fire, and then they're thrown into the future. And they're
as is the tradition.
Right. Because when you're in a room that goes into a parallel world and the outside's on fire, it always happens. I do think this wasn't necessarily an accident, because when you look at the entire, I think this sequence is geared. Well, first, I think this is proof that Judah Zachary has a scorched earth mentality towards the Collins.
Yeah.
Okay. Because this isn't just, it's not just when you go through the actual ruins of Collinwood. Probably something that was on budget at the time would have been like some cobwebs, maybe like an upturned couch, because they'd want to, but it just looks so devastating. And even the way directed at times, I couldn't get a sense of the geography. And that's not an insult. It's just the way it was. And the fact that you really see how damaged the characters are. I mean, the fact that they brought back Mrs. Johnson for that intro sequence, you'd figure, okay, she, that's who we can afford at the time, but she gives that kind of ground level. Then you go to Carolyn, who's like, you can understand why she's broken, but I think she's also kind of a tool of Judah Zachary. And you get to Quentin, you're like, holy, like every expletive you can think of, you're saying. Yeah. And it gets to the fact that when even Julia's starting to turn a little bit, where you're like, holy, I mean, this isn't, I know the intention was to introduce Gerard Stiles. I don't think this is an introduction. I think this is Judah Zachary's victory march. I think this is way of, and I think he's pretty much trying to tell Barnabas, we know he's not going to be able to attack Barnabas directly. But I think his way of saying, don't even bother. You're going to lose. I mean, it isn't even, I'm going to whoop you if you fight me. It's like, don't even bother. You're going to lose. And I think he brought him there just to make the point that, yeah, you're not going to win this. Don't even try.
He knows that Barnabas is one of the few people who can stop him.
Right.
And if only because of Barnabas's friends. And if he can demoralize Barnabas to the point that not only does he know all this stuff in 1970 is going to happen, but he's powerless to do it. Mm-hmm. He'll be completely demoralized. He's not even going to bother to go back to 1840. He's not going to try to find any I Ching wands or anything like that. It's game over.
Yeah, and even when as the transition sequence begins, leading to 1840, when Barnabas does decide to go through, he's faced with Julius' tombstone. I mean, this is serious, and Jewel, you've spoke about this before. I mean, this is serious George A. Romero / John Carpenter stuff happening. Because when I saw that sequence, a couple of films that brought to mind were Carpenter films like The Fog and Escape from New York, which obviously weren't around at the time, but they just had that feeling of it's the cluttered, messy, things have gone wrong, and there's really no way out of this.
Another Carpenter film you could look at is Prince of Darkness as well.
Yes, definitely.
There's
anti-God.
You're right. There's so much George A. Romero, John Carpenter stuff here, even though those films don't exist yet. And really, too, it gives, even though the 90s aren't here yet, there's not that grunge music. This feels like grunge, dirty, gritty, dark shadows.
Yeah, it has that feeling, and this is where I get nostalgic, because this was, I grew up in the mid-30s, in the mid-90s, and I came of age with Chicago, and Chicago was the other scene. And what a lot of bands and musicians were doing was they would go into neighborhoods that had a lot of really low-cost housing, like Wicker Park was one of the they'd go in, they get cheap rent, but they do a lot of work to build sweat equity into their housing. So you're seeing this kind of people taking advantage of that and trying to move forward. But there was a lot of, kind of in the 90s, a lot of urban squalor, a lot of, I lived in St. Louis in the early 2000s where there were like literally abandoned buildings where it would be like landlords would own properties and you'd see like, okay, house, abandoned, boarded up. So this sequence really has it. And it's maybe one of the few times where with Dark Shadows, it was like whatever happens in Collinwood stays in Collinwood. Like if you wanted to get freaky with a phoenix or with a blonde who set fire to tarot cards to cause magic, it stayed in Collinwood. You never had to worry about the outside worlds. And that's kind of what soap operas did. Here you kind of feel like, I'm curious about, okay, if Collinwood's this bad, how's the rest of the outside world? Because they had to react to this. Because it's not... Pardon?
It's pretty shell-shocked.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like... And I could see the writers basically saying, okay, you want to watch? And I think, Patrick, I think I was listening to a podcast where you had said where people were complaining about the sequence that you had to watch every day. It's like, it's a soap opera. You're supposed to watch every day.
Well, I think soap operas were designed so that you could watch once a week or twice a week. If you look at the early years of Dark Shadows, it's full of repetition and it's full of a very stately pace. This week we introduced the pen. Next week we introduced the pen cap. It's not, Liz will start dialing a phone and maybe by the end of December, she'll get to the little dash. But by this point, either they had a lot of story to tell and they just didn't care, or they gave more credit to their audience. They realized, you know what, these people are tuning in every day. We're bored with all this repetition. Let's tell a damn story.
And yeah, plus it is the most relentless that I think Dark Shadows has been in terms of tone. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
It's wonderfully joyless. I mean, it is just a relentless, grinding joylessness that is there to tell you, and I talk about this maybe in the best daybook I ever wrote, that, you know, we've been treating this like a big carnival horror ride, you know, where you sit in a little car and you go through and there's Ed Wood getting a date, and, you know, it's that kind of thing. But living in a house full of terror ultimately isn't like that. And it has true collateral damage. Maggie, you know, that these people just can't be expected to bounce back again and again and again. And that gives a sense of stakes that is so profound that I really don't think they could have done another storyline in the primary universe after this.
Mm-hmm.
These people are shattered.
Another thing too is what really wakes you up too is how broken Stokes is. I mean, he's just just when you think they can't punch you in the stomach harder, you know, with 1995, here's Stokes, and it's like
Bring in a guy with a lot of stomach.
Yeah.
Yep.
And here's the thing I noticed, and again, this may just be me reading more, but and it also may be because I was watching on a computer monitor rather than a television. But one of the things I noticed about the makeup around Stokes' neck, it may just be the nature of the makeup, but it looks like he's not just old, but burned. I mean, it looks like scar tissue.
Yeah.
Scar tissue. I mean, Stokes is the kind of character who, it pretty much, he's going to get through, and he will blitz through. He may not be indestructible, but he's kind of like, he knows his way through this stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, fine, bring it to me. I mean, the only time we see him fail is exorcising the ghost of Quentin Collins from Collinwood before 1897. However, I think that was Judah Zachary, like, kind of, he was like checking out the competition. He's like, because he's, as a ghost of Quentin Collins, like, you know what? Can I take these dudes? Like, I'm sure he pulled something in like the early 1790s where he's like, yeah, they're not there yet. You know what I mean?
Well, I've given a theory about this, that it's not, that the ghost of Quentin is not the ghost of Quentin.
Yeah, it's Judah Zachary.
Judah Zachary, yeah, and that's maybe the body of Trask in there. He had a different outfit on. I mean, there's enough changes in the timeline to explain that. But that's Trask. And that it's Judah just messing with them and seeing what, as you said, he's testing them. He's seeing what's going to go on, and maybe he thinks that this is going to end it. That he'll demoralize them here. He'll take care of that because, I think Judah's plan all along has been to kill the Collinses with a slow acid, and that's been fine when the Collinses have been just sort of lame bunters. But when Barnabas and Quentin enter the scene, he's dealing with gods. He's dealing with gods. And, the thing that's so important, and you talked about this a little bit, to the storyline is the fact that the two people who are the craziest are Stokes and Quentin. And that those guys should be the toughest. And so if the toughest are taken down by this, what hope does a neurotic like Barnabas possibly have?
To touch on Gordon, it sort of felt like there's that moment in Kenobi where Kenobi's lifted up and thrown into the fire by Vader. It sort of felt like that, where Stokes may have been just thrown into a fire, where Stokes may have just been thrown into flames. And I think they don't show something like that on Dark Shadows, but you could sort of get the hint of that may have happened with Stokes.
Sure. I mean, think about what Stokes would have tried to do even after Barnabas and Julia, went through time and disappeared. The different rituals or things like that he might have conducted. And if Quentin did what he did to him, just imagine what Zachary would do. And he probably let Stokes think he won a few times, only to slam him back as hard as he could.
Mm-hmm.
Is Judah Zachary the baddest mofo on the planet?
Certainly on the show.
Yeah, I think on the show he is the ultimate big bad, because most Dark Shadows, up until Judah Zachary, most of the antagonists have been dealing with it for just small kinds of victory. For Angelique, it's Barnabas's love. For Laura, it's dying in a fire with David. For Nicholas Blair, it's basically power in the underworld. For Patofi, it's wanting to be King Warlock, wanting his hand back, and essentially taking over Collinwood on some level.
And Quentin, if it is Quentin, just wants to be master of Collinwood.
Right. So that's it. Judah Zachary wants the Collins family destroyed.
Yeah.
He wants them just totally obliterated. And the fact that he was able to drive them out of their house, where you even go to the town that they were named after, and their name is a dirty word. It's not just, again, he doesn't want them to exist. He just wants them dead.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Even the sheriff, when he sees Carolyn's body, is like, what did you do? This isn't Sheriff George Patterson. This is a sheriff who was in. I get the sense he had feelings for Carolyn and even was in love with her because he knew her when she was younger. He's the same age as her.
On the show. Continue.
Yeah, he was the same age as her. That's the sense.
No. When you look at the flashback, she's presumably, if she's in her 20s in the late 60s, we'll assume she's like late 40s, early 50s. He's in maybe his mid 30s, early 40s. So there's a bit of a difference, because he even says, when I was a kid, I really he's talking about when I was a kid, I saw you a lot. So there's a big difference between kids. They're not the same age.
Okay, my bad. But you get the sense he knew her, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he knew her, and he's in shock that she's dead. It's like, what did you do? And then the coroner, they actually have a coroner result on the show. They don't show the coroner, but they actually have that, she died. And it's like, Carolyn's now dead. They kill Carolyn, and it's that much shocking on the show.
There's only one other moment that's really shocking. The first time we see Quentin, Barnabas and Julia walk in, and he's about to stab the painting.
Yeah.
That is, it's one thing. It's one thing to, the question I have is, how could he have stayed? Because when we go into the present, he's
what you did to Jewel.
Yeah.
You might continue.
Yeah. When we go to 1970, 71, and we see him start to break down, how did he manage to not get sanity in that time? But I think the fact that he's about ready to kill himself, literally.
Well, try, because the painting will take the damage. Or will it? No, that was if he did it to himself, the painting would take the damage.
Right. If he does it to the painting, then he suffers.
It could be. We don't know. We don't know if he's not tried this a bunch of times and the painting has reformed itself. If this is a weird self-destructive ritual, it's the closest he can get to it. He's wearing those suspenders and suddenly speaking in a Southern accent.
Yeah, the question becomes, if he stabs the painting, does he die or does he become the werewolf?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest sort of mind question of if he if you're sort of wanting it to happen in the sense of, okay, if he stabs this painting, what happens? What really happens?
Now, normally the only thing that comes out of my mouth is fatuous nonsense, and I won't break that tradition. But all seriousness aside, what if you shot the painting when it's a werewolf with a silver bullet? Seriously. Right. Is that the ultimate way to destroy him?
I would say yes. I would have to say that's the way. Because if he just stabs the painting, if he just stabs it, if they allow that, he's just becoming the werewolf.
But we don't know if the knife's made of silver.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. It's one of the biggest what if moments in Dark Shadows at that time. Because if we've seen where if Quentin just stabs himself, the painting bleeds. We've seen that.
Yeah.
But if he just stabs the painting, we don't know. And it's a beautiful what if moment in 1995. But Carolyn's death, and it's heartbreaking. And then Stokes, my God.
Well, and it'll be, we've seen Carolyn kind of die before. There's a question of, is there anything different in the second haunting of Collinwood, the one where Barnabas and Julia go back and deal with it, knowing what the prophecy is? Is that a second haunting of Collinwood or not? And if it is, does Gerard kill the children and maybe Carolyn also? Because there's that, I guess 1198. No, it's not that. It's like it's 1060 or something. It's the one where the zombies march. Yeah. And Gerard sort of looms over the kids, and I see it as kind of a weird, horrible murder, rape, just hideousness that goes on, just a defiling. Because it's clear, well, it's ambiguously clear that Gerard is a sexual predator. Because, Barnabas in the last episode of 1995 says, "You've been with him."
Yeah.
You've been with him. That, in soap opera language, is a very specific thing.
Yeah, it's the fact that Julia is getting it on with a ghost. Is Julia just wants love.
What would be a really weird way to pick this storyline up is if after 1841 they went back to 1970 again, and 1971 Julia's pregnant.
Yeah.
Which she doesn't understand because she's already been through the change, and but she's pregnant, and the only possible thing it could be is Gerard. And what on earth is that going to be?
Yeah, or kind of using kind of what soap opera, what you might be able to get away with the censors.
Yeah.
Is that there was an actual assault, but it was something that Julia experienced in her mind and not physically. It's something that the next Star Trek Next Generation did a couple of times with Troy. I'm not saying it's a good option. I'm thinking that probably, I'm not sure how far they could go with ghost sex.
They wouldn't have done it. This is just my what if. This isn't the show actually doing that.
If they could have gotten away with something like that, like if they could have done that, they probably would have. Because Gerard, he is a predator. And here's the thing too. Even with Haley, Gerard, the kids, it's eerie. It's creepy. as hell.
It is.
And what's worse, 1995 or the fact that Barnabas and Julia, when they go to 1970, when they come back, and they're like, they feel it's sort of like they feel like Paul Revere, but it's fallen on deaf ears.
It's fallen on deaf ears, and they only have very vague things. I mean, Carolyn, don't sing. Whatever you do, Carolyn, don't sing. Well, singing her song, A, could have been a metaphor, or B, what's that mean? She can't hum in the shower? You know, what does that even mean? You know, the night of the sun and the moon, I assume is, you know, Stokes is changing into his Ghostbusters outfit, and he's bent over, and David walks in and sees him from behind. Roger's son and the moon of Stokes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, even with the when they say about the horoscope, Quentin tells them, you know, Elizabeth already had her horoscope read. So when you sort of have that happen, what they're not, Carolyn isn't specific with certain things. They get the eclipse part. They get that, but they don't say it's Carolyn who asked to have her horoscope read because Sebastian Shaw looks like Jeb Hawkes.
Yeah, but you also have to consider the source. I mean, they got it from someone who was not in their right mind. And, you know, it's the difference between, hey, Patrick, you don't want to go to that 7-Eleven at the corner of this place and that place on January 21st, 2023 at 10 a.m. because they're going to be out. You want to brew coffee at home that day. It's avoid the winter thing where you're going to go get your, you know, it's very abstract. And it's also hard too, because Barnabas and Julia have been taken from one crisis point to another. So mentally, they're like still, what the heck? What's well, at least Barnabas is what's happening in parallel time. I think Julia is starting to be, you know, she's upset enough to become under the influence of Judah Zachary. So they're not thinking, okay, we have some hard touch points. They've got maybe a piece of scribbles, because one of the things that was mentioned is Rose Cottage, where there, you know, at least to that time, there's no Rose Cottage in 1970.
Man.
What's it?
Well,
the McPherson? What's the family? It's not the McPhersons. It's the Magruder Mansion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it has pretty much two names. It has it's Rose Cottage, but it's the Magruder Mansion.
Magruder Mansion by day, Rose Cottage by night.
Magruder Mansion on the streets, Rose Cottage in the sheets.
If you can't take me at my unrenovated.
Well, wait a second. What kind of business was Flora Collins running?
Well, what sort of books was she writing? I think is the.
Right. Well, here's the thing: when you're hanging with Gerard Stiles, things will happen.
Whose nickname I believe was Hare.
I will say this: the James Storm does not get enough credit for just selling his ass off as a ghost, and just he mouths stuff, but you don't hear him say anything. To me, he's the best ghost, bar none. I mean,
actually, I'm going to differ with you on one point. Having rewatched the 1995 flashback recently, I didn't see him mouth anything.
Well,
during that arc,
he moves his lips, but you don't hear him say anything. Like it's weird. You got to sort of catch it, because when I was watching this today, I watched this throughout the day with my wife before she went to work tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And he moves his lips, but he doesn't say words. And it's so creepy. There's moments he comes down the steps and Quentin falls to the ground. But when Julia looks at him, he moves his lips, but there's no words coming out. And it's like, wait, what's he saying? Is he saying his name to her? Because she does.
Actually, that would make a lot of sense because at one point I think she refers to him as Gerard.
Yeah,
just out of nowhere.
Yeah, she does say Gerard. And it's like, that's sort of like what I was asking myself when I'm rewatching this throughout the day. I'm like, wait, is he saying his name to her? Because when she says Gerard, I'm thinking that's what he must have said to her. And it's still creepy when he does it. But James Storm is just so smooth as Gerard. When you actually get to hear him talk as Gerard, he's so just like, he's sort of like a mini Quentin, but smoother. He smooths the heck out of Virginia Vestal.
Yeah, but the great thing in this arc is he's just so solid and so he never like there's never a moment where you feel like he's breaking character or he's letting himself relax.
Yeah.
He's like, I mean, he's pile driving through this arc. And I mean that in a very complimentary way.
Yeah.
I sort of wish they would have had James Storm in a way his character live, because they do have to shoot him in 1840, which is like, but I know they did this with other characters, but he's such a good villain when he becomes Judah Zachary, because they do try to get Judah Zachary's head back attached to his body with Julia, but it doesn't work.
Well, and the tragedy, of course, is that it's not really Gerard Stiles who's doing any of this. He's a puppet of Judah.
Yeah.
And so, he's not even really, I mean, what's he atoning for? Curiosity? Being a little sleazy? But that's it. He's a real victim in all of this. And, in terms of just the role play concept of television, you're dealing with James Storm. Oh, no, let's go back further. You're dealing with Sam Hall and Gordon writing a character for James Storm named Ivan Miller, who's pretending to be Gerard Stiles, who's actually possessed by Judah Zachary. That is a bit of meta television in terms of just the role play of television.
Mm-hmm.
That could keep academics in business for the next 20 years.
I like the
they brought back James Storm in another kind of unique villainous role, because that way he can play different notes on the same theme, but you also give him a different backstory. You give him a different motivation. Maybe he's the long lost protege of Campatofi, come back to, earn his mentor's title.
Well, here's another one. They never got around to revealing that Victoria was Liz's daughter. So if they did that, what if she had twins?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the son.
Yep.
Who really comes in to challenge Roger and David for who the next master of Collinwood's going to be.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you could have a literal divide between the family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially
as David's getting older and more defiant, and Roger's increasingly absent.
Yeah.
And then here comes this other guy, and maybe he's a good guy. I don't know, because Fred would Jonathan Frid be off the series at that point, and because he'd been fired, I think his contract was up if they had gone back, and so this other Collins is possessed by Barnabas Collins, and so you could also have that, because someone's got to play Barnabas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that James Storm plays one of the best ghosts, but what did you guys think of them actually trying to do a seance with Stokes in 1995?
I thought it was interesting, simply because this is Stokes, at least for me, on some level, he's trying to, I think it's like his last ditch effort to kind of redeem himself, to work himself out. I think it's hard too, because at some point it's like, Judah Zachary is so powerful at this point. It's like, what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't call Ghostbusters, you can't, it's not like the other alternative is like, you know what, we're stuck in 95, you and me, Julia, let's go. There's a bunch of 6 crazy kids in New York hanging out at Central Park. Let's go live with them.
Yeah. What did you think, Patrick?
Of what?
The Stokes seance, them trying to do a seance, or not a seance, an exorcism, I should say.
I mean, the idea of Stokes doing something like that's always going to be powerful.
Yeah.
And it just increases the fatalism of what's going on.
What was you guys' favorite part with 1995 and 1970, leading up to 1840?
Well, that's a big stretch of a lot of images. So I mean, the zombies crashing Collinwood, the actual apocalypse, the waving of the flag, and Gerard's attack. All of the stuff with the dollhouse is terrifying. It legitimately is. When David and Holly look in and see themselves trapped in the dollhouse, to me is the single most frightening, unsettling image in the show. When I talk about this in the daybook, I watched that in broad daylight with a friend of mine, and he and I are both pretty well worn when it comes to horror, and it scared the shit out of us. So that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of images, like some of the initial revelation of Collinwood being decimated were really effective, because there were times where I really could not get a sense of where things were, and it wasn't because of the clutter. It was just the way they had the kind of debris set up and the way it was shot. The another thing that a couple of other things that kind of point out in my head is just the way that a lot of things that are set up in this arc are paid off in the 1840 arc, and not in the lead up to 1840, especially since the fact that the last scene of the zombie episode, we see several of, and I'm sure they took photos to make sure it matched, but like the way that Collinwood was being destroyed by the zombies pretty much fit what was going on in the house. Because when I started watching it, the assumption is, okay, something happened between, okay, we know David will die in 1970, but that the leaving the house took 25 years. It's like, no, it happened that day.
Yeah.
And that's what really kind of, and it's kind of hard too, because I think that the way that James Storm is shot and lit is very effective. And I think the fact that there's a couple of scenes where Barnabas and Julia are in the foyer, and they're talking, and you see like this real weird kind of series of lights at the top of the balcony. and the camera zooms in, and it's Gerard, and he's lit where you see his eyes and you see his mouth, maybe the outline of his hair, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very effective.
I like way before they showed Gerard, they showed like this blue little lighting of a ghost, and you're not sure who it is. I think that really is a really great build up towards Gerard, even if
it's really very different from Quentin also to differentiate them.
Right. It's really a great build up for him, and then when you finally see the ghost, it's like, wait, why does that guy look so angry? And then you get they hear his name, and it's like, well, okay, well, that doesn't explain why he's so pissed. I love the fact that when they go from 1995 back to 1970, and they have all these, they have the warning signs, and they're telling people, and it's just, like I said, it's falling on deaf ears, and it's like, I was talking about in a video I did recently about fate, destiny, death, all being characters in Dark Shadows. And I think that's where really 1995 and 1970 really fit that narrative, where it's fate that this is supposed to happen. This is meant to happen. For some reason, Barnabas, Julia are meant to go back to 1840, really. They're meant to go back to where the curse really began, so to speak, or find out where it really began. And it's all leading to that. And that's the one thing I take away most from 1995 to 1970.
Well, I think another thing, one of the themes that I see in Dark Shadows is that of consequences. Right. That a lot of times characters are forced to deal with the consequences of their actions. And I think this arc kind of demonstrates that, once we figure out, if you think about it, the whole reason why they ended up in 1995 in the first place was that Barnabas found the door to the parallel time. And he said, hey, I want to go to parallel time because I won't be a vampire. And Stokes is like, no, don't. Bad idea. Julia's like, no, bad idea. Barnabas pushes in. He ends up chained in a coffin for a while. He gets out and has shenanigans. But there's always the sense of the fact that certain actions characters are paying for. And I think that when we learned that, that this whole curse 1995 came about because a guy did not like being, a warlock, was found guilty of witchcraft. And the guy who judged him and the woman he loved, guy who judged him made that verdict, and the woman he was involved with and taught turned against him. And so I think there's this feeling of, and I also think that this, at this point, Dark Shadows are just kind of like, you know what, we're not playing. We are, like, I'm sure they were listening to side one, track two of Kick Out the Jams by the MC5, where, the lead singer yells, kick out the jams, 12-letter word without a pullover tones.
Yeah. What did you think, Patrick?
Of what specifically? Because that covered a lot of ground.
Anything from Judah's Act, where we have Judah Zachary.
It's the apocalypse of the show. It's the show growing up. The audience has been aging with the show, and it's sort of like the Harry Potter books. It's almost as if the show is growing up with it, and the show realizes that the kids who were 14 a couple of years ago when Quentin was running around are now 16. They're now driving. They probably have an older sibling or so who may have been drafted into Vietnam. When they started the show, we had not yet, I guess we were still in the midst of the Gemini missions. But we've landed on the moon, and we now have a president who doesn't seem to really think it's a big deal, the likes of which the president who started it did. We have death tolls coming in on TV every night. The brother of the president, the brother who is still alive, who is one of our great hopes, is dead. Malcolm X, dead. Martin Luther King, dead. Woodstock was an embarrassment. It was a mud-soaked failure in a lot of ways. And it wasn't even a good cultural watershed because so many, conservatives could cite it for all of the failures and weirdnesses that took place in there. Had Altamont happened yet?
I think it happened in 1969, so yeah.
Yeah.
There was a really short period of time between Woodstock and Altamont.
You had Altamont, which was a living hell. You had the Manson murders. So all of these things, all of these great hopes, all of these great aspirations that were persisting despite the assassination of John Kennedy, when the show went on the air, have all been dashed.
And also and kind of piggybacking on that, television was going through some radical changes at the time. The major
was coming on the air, All in the Family was coming on the air. It was also like Dream of Jeannie.
Yeah, well, like leading to that, you had in the late 60s, you had what was known as the rural purge. And that started because Nielsen started, instead of doing their ratings just by numbers, by demographics. So you had a bunch of shows that were more, your Mayberry RFD, your Green Acres, your Beverly Hillbillies were just canceled because network heads saw, hey, yes, people in rural areas, they'll watch TV, but you know who spends money? People in urban areas. And one of the big trends was towards relevance, which meant shows like Ironside, even stuff like the Mod Squad was trying to be topic. Like we would call it woke in our current language.
Sure.
And it was,
as I said, MASH and All in the Family were right there. Sanford and Son was just a few months away from coming on the air.
Mm-hmm.
This was all a big deal. Yeah, CBS, I think it was the head of CBS said, I don't want anything with a tree for the rural purge.
It's also why like shows like Star Trek did so well in syndication because their last year, their last year was the first year that Nielsen actually measured demographics.
Yeah.
And it was, oh wait, we get young men between 18 and 35 with so when we syndicate it, they would suggest, okay, here are times where your audience is more likely to watch it. So like when I was according to family lore, I was watching Star Trek with my dad at 18 months old, and my dad was feeding me potato chips, and I scratched myself with one. I don't remember. I was rather young, but like I remember watching it as like 7 or 8 on Channel 9 at 10 a.m., followed by The Lone Ranger and the Cisco Kid.
Star Trek. What day of the week was that? Was that
Sunday?
Okay.
Morning.
It's interesting. That's a very political time slot. In a lot of parts of the country, it was Daily Strip, even though they didn't really have enough for Daily Strip. They pretended they did. In Louisville, it was on not at 10 a.m. It was on at 11 a.m. on Sunday, which is about the most political time slot you can have for a show that is a ritualistic lecture on how to behave, taught by beings who live in the sky once a week during church time, when religion was already on the decline in the U.S. And what do you have as this alternative at core religion time once a week? Star Trek at 11 a.m. And if you don't think that was a political choice, oh man, because to risk that kind of demographic slot at that time, and I mean that thing stayed on in Louisville, I think from around 1971 or so at 11 a.m. on Sunday, I think for 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I don't think it was on that long in Chicago, but you have to understand Chicago's media culture. We had like Channel 9 was actually used to be owned by the Chicago Tribune. WGN stands for World
Was that
Journals News.
WGN?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got that in Louisville. That was part of your basic cable package.
Well, I didn't have basic cable, so
you didn't need it because you lived there, but I didn't live in Chicago, so that's how I saw WGN.
Right, but you had like this weird amalgam of like you had your and trust me, folks, we'll get back to Dark Shadows. You had like your PBS, but you had like Channel 30, like Channel WGN back in the day had a morning show involving a guy in a jumpsuit who had little like things paper clipped to his pockets, who would show cartoons, play with a duck, and when he'd do the weather and sports, and he had a cap with one half was a Cubs hat and one half is a White Sox cap and flip around.
Tom Brokaw was dropping a lot of acid back then.
No, this was very
Today Show was going through a lot of changes. The duck was the duck was Gene Shalit, and he was magnificent.
To be fair, what Patrick's saying, yeah, in Pennsylvania when I was a kid, WGN was on your cable. It was on your part of your basic cable package. So if you lived in a different state, like I live in Pennsylvania,
right.
It is a part of your. It was. I can't speak for now, but it was a part of your basic cable package when I was a kid.
Yeah, and you have to understand, Chicago didn't really get cable television. The suburbs didn't get it until the early '80s, and I don't think Chicago formally got it until the late '80s.
Well, you know why? Cable was designed initially for rural areas,
right,
outside of broadcast range, so they could get it. It was a country thing.
What did you guys think of Haley Stokes?
And then a profound silence ensued. Well, okay, I got three things to say. Let's see if I can remember any of them. One, it is grossly unfair to pick on child actors.
Right.
And when you have the legacy of David Hennessy and Denise Nickerson on the show, who are fantastic child actors, it sets a very high and arguably unfair bar for everyone else. So, because I think the immediate thing that I would want to do is say something catty, and that's wrong. That's wrong to do. It is. I'm sure, like all actors, the experience of doing Dark Shadows made her a better actor. And it's unfortunate the first lines we have coming back from 1995 are these wooden contraction filled "Who are you? Who are you?" I have every confidence that Kathy Cody probably looks at those and goes, "Ooh, my first lines on the show." Two, she is, I think she is one of the people like Kate Jackson, who's written in very specifically to be a next generation. If they can't keep Carolyn, or if Carolyn's aging into a different type of character, if they can't, Catherine's gone, and Dan loved a brunette lead, and she is kind of the governess by the time they leave 1840 in that smart red dress. The dress. So I think Kathy Cody is written in to be the new blonde on the show, and she is written in to age. Dan got her a couple of years before she would really be of an appropriate age to be that female lead. Now, let's talk about the really uncomfortable part of this, which is the semiotics of the stage in life that Kathy Cody and David Hennessy are in, because it's clear that they have risen to a nice golden brown in the oven of puberty while we've been gone. Yeah. And it's double plus extra creepy in a way that works for the show really well. For Gerard to be manipulating them into changing clothes together and all of that, because Kathy Cody is at this visually really awkward place where sometimes she's a little kid and sometimes she looks disturbingly womanly, considering the age of the character that she's kind of playing. And that idea of kind of sexual liminality, of being in this kind of identityless place where sometimes it's a little bit of this and sometimes it's a little bit of that, adds to the uneasy quality of this sequence. I'll tell you secretly what one of the creepiest parts of this is in that last episode, or the second to last episode of this sequence, of the Ragnarok sequence, when Gerard makes them go into a room and change clothes. Because they're seeing each other unclothed. And they are of an age where they're going to have thoughts, or suppressed thoughts, or have thoughts about not having thoughts, but you know what I mean. But the clothes themselves are not 1840s clothes. They are that little bit of Edwardian flashback that fashion went through, but just a little bit. No, they're modern clothes from Brewster's. And so I may have talked about this before, but what are those clothes? I would say they're the clothes their bodies are going to be buried in. They're their last outfits, and they're special, like clothes that we get buried in are. And that, to me, combines death and youth and sexuality in a purposefully and wonderfully sickening way. So that's what I think.
Gordon, what did you think?
Brought on, obviously, because
Gordon, we missed.
I would assume that Denise.
Gordon,
okay,
we missed that.
Can you see me?
Yeah,
we can see
okay,
it now.
well,
We didn't hear any of it.
Okay, well, I think she was brought in. I would assume that Denise Nickerson, for some reason, either aged out or couldn't perform the role.
She's Willy Wonka.
I don't.
She was doing. I think she was doing Wonka.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that part of it is that kind of needing to. Patrick said the need to transition. I also don't like picking on young actors, except in one exception that does not apply to Dark Shadows. But it was because the actor was particular. What?
Is it Yippee? Is it that one? Is it Jake Lloyd?
No.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. You're a good man.
Well, I mean, Jake Lloyd was. I'm like you, Patrick. I don't like picking on child actors because I think sometimes they're forced into a role, and sometimes they're dealing with bigger pressures, and they're given a responsibility that maybe they don't deserve. Yeah. I will make an exception for one young man, a gentleman by the name of Matthew Waterhouse.
Oh, wait. What did he play?
He was Adric on Doctor Who.
Oh, okay.
And he was one of those. He grew up with the show, and then all of a sudden he's an actor on the show, and it was like his second role ever.
I'll make an exception. Donnie Donegan.
Who's he?
You know Donnie Donegan? Well, on the good side, he was the voice of Bambi. Great.
Okay.
Hard to screw that up. On the negative side, he was Basil Rathbone's son in Son of Frankenstein.
Ooh.
Are we gonna go shoot a lion, Daddy? He talks like this all the time. How is that the son of Basil Rathbone? It's like his parents had something on the casting director at Universal, which is weird because Donnie Donegan. Do you know about what happened to Donnie Donegan? This is great, and this is not about him having a penis so large he hit a golf ball with it, which is normally where I go with this if we start talking about Forrest Tucker. But we're not talking about Forrest Tucker. Donnie Donegan, I've done that to you, Joel, several times. At least twice I've gone into that story. Donnie Donegan became a badass Marine in Vietnam. This is true. You can look it up. He was known as Don Buster Donegan, and he kicked ass. I mean, he was the real, like, Kane from Ninth Configuration, except he was sane. And Donnie Doonigan's still alive, and he will kick my ass once he watches this, and I will have it kicked with pride. Donnie Doonigan, I will have it kicked with pride. He's a cool guy, but it's not so much that his performance is bad. It's that he's too young to be playing that part.
Right.
Of the real son of Frankenstein. I mean, technically he's the title character. Or grandson of Frankenstein, I guess. But also, how the hell is he the son of Basil Rathbone?
Yeah, because you got the frizz.
It's the hair and the line. He has no mustache. So it's completely unbelievable.
Well,
sorry, I'm going to... Go ahead, Pat.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, Waterhouse developed a reputation for being difficult on the set and decided, hey, he's now on the show that he loves so much, so he's going to make changes, including telling a very well-known English stage actor how to play his part.
Ooh.
And the funny thing is that the character was killed off in a very popular episode, and let me give you the ending scene. I don't mind spoiling it. Is that he's supposed to be entering a code because he's a math genius. He's basically Wesley Crusher without the backbone, and he's supposed to be entering in the keyboard. Well, the keyboard was rigged to explode at a certain point. So instead of doing this, like an actor, he's doing.
Well, that's how I type.
Well, yeah, but you're not entering a code to stop an explosion. You're creating valuable art. And he's a cool guy, but yeah, he was a bit annoying. And then the other question I wanted to ask you, Patrick, because you would know this.
Yes.
Is it true that Forrest Tucker and Milton Berle had a competition about their size, and Berle said, "Hey, I'll show enough to win."
I'll show enough to win is what Milton Berle said after seeing what Forrest Tucker had to offer. He's like, it was like torture. Finally, Tucker kind of reveals his Schwanzstücker, and Milton Berle looks at it and says, "Okay, I'll participate, but I'm only going to show enough to win."
I'm going to play devil's advocate when it comes to Haley.
About what?
When it comes to the character of Haley Stokes.
Oh, thank God.
Okay.
So you were going to talk about Roddy McDowall all of a sudden. That just adds in a third leg.
No. You want to talk about third leg? Look at Tommy Lee when it comes to Pam Anderson. Okay. Anyway.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about Haley Stokes.
No. Haley Stokes, the character of Haley Stokes. Okay. Think about Judah Zachary for a second. Judah Zachary has a cult. What do we learn about Angelique and him? They were most likely what? Lovers.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, lovers. She was his disciple. I think he's who taught her the black arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's be honest. It's Angelique. Who wouldn't?
Right. But here's what I take away from it. Now, I know Laura Parker's not the same age as the actress who played Haley Stokes. I get that. But I always got the sense of what they were hinting at is Angelique was a lot younger than what she was when Judah hooked up with her. That's the one. I don't know why I take that away from that. Like, that's what I walk away
I got to diagram that. Hold on. You got to explain that to me a little more thoroughly.
Okay. I get Laura Parker is not the same age as the actress who plays Haley. Okay?
Yes, that's right.
The character of Angelique, Judah Zachary, I always get the sense of Judah Zachary enjoyed young women. That's what I take away from when you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
I always take away that Angelique was a lot younger as Miranda, when they were getting it on. I don't know if she was the same age as Haley, but I sort of get that sense that she may have been.
I think she worked. Did she work at the school?
Yeah, she did. I believe so.
Yeah.
But I know it's a weird comparison, but Haley Stokes as a character is again, because Judah Zachary's a pervert in a sense. And you're right. The line she gets is not the best line. Who are you?
Who are you?
Who are you? But I will say this though.
What?
She shouldn't know who Barnabas and Julie are. She's never met them. Because again, she's a newer character.
It's not the fact that she asks, "Who are you?" It's also the fact that she's not allowed to speak in contractions. Like, what's wrong? What is wrong? It's like, did Dr. Sung not put in that chip properly for you so you could say the contractions?
I will say this about Haley though. I love her and David Hennessy's the character, her and David Hennessy's chemistry. It's really well done. I love how they do a good job together. In my opinion.
Yeah, Kathy Cody is easily the most improved in the shortest time performance on the series.
Right. But so to me, like Haley is sort of like a young, weird representation to me in a weird way of Angelique. I know she's not Angelique, but I think in a weird way, she's a young representation of what. Because I got to take away that Judah Zachary probably liked his women young.
And you have to also admit that in the late 17th century, I'm not sure there were the prohibitions about marrying or getting involved at, the age of consent, for lack of a better term.
Right.
I'm not sure I would go as far as to say that Hallie is a representation of Angelique. Right. Maybe young blonde women were Judah's thing, like it was his fetish. But I'm not sure if it's. I don't think it's that. I think if Hallie had been, say, a redhead or a brunette or any others, I don't think Judah Zachary, his driving thing is destroy the Collinses. Everyone else is a pawn. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And it's interesting in terms of which Collinses he wants to destroy. Because, we talked about this being sort of aimed at Barnabas, but maybe it really isn't. And the reason I say that is that Barnabas takes, even though Barnabas has the torture of knowing that he might be able to stop it and can't, that's about it.
Right.
But Barnabas is not a descendant of Amadeus Collins. Or no, he's not a descendant of Amadeus Collins. Daniel and Gabriel and Theodore and Alvin and Simon and Judith and those guys are that line changes when Barnabas basically ends the family line when he becomes a vampire. And that's where the New York line takes over. And it's the New York line that was in Bedford that sent Judah Zachary to hell. And they're the ones who are largely tortured.
Yeah. Well, I don't
Barnabas is out of it.
Let me maybe clarify something. I don't think Judah Zachary has a particular hate on for Barnabas. I don't think he's seeing Barnabas as an enemy. I think at this point in the 1995 thing, it could have been Sparky Collins who showed up.
Yeah.
It could have been, Sparky from the Beloit, Wisconsin branch of the Collins family. He'd be like, what? Don't even try. This is my victory lap. You're going to lose. Goodbye.
Yeah. Well, so here's what Judah Zachary is. He's Galactus.
Yes.
And like it or not, Barnabas is his herald.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a Silver Surfer. He's his herald. Doom is coming. Look busy.
Well, when you look at people who even aren't Collinses that Judah has no problem destroying, Mrs. Johnson isn't a Collins. She may have worked for him, but she's not a Collins. Elliot Stokes, is he a Collins? No, but Gerard has no problem getting Gerard, Judah Zachary, I should say. He loves destroying people who would align with the Collins even. If he thought someone was going to help the Collins or saw someone, even if Barnabas would have got killed by the sheriff, Julia's going to get 86 real fast.
Does Mrs. Johnson die in this?
I'm
No.
not sure.
Does Quentin die?
Quentin doesn't die.
Quentin doesn't die.
In the
Carolyn dies.
Carolyn
I
dies.
think Mrs. Johnson collapses at the graveyard.
Well, when doesn't she? But the thing is that if you look at so he's finally taken Carolyn out, and it's just a matter of time for Quentin. So I'm still convinced that he's going after that Bedford, New York branch.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you on that. I just think that when it comes to that's his sole focus, and everything else is like secondary.
Sure,
you know what I mean? It's like if he's coming after you, he's not going to, and I say, oh, I'm going to stop you from getting after Patrick. He's going to be like, no, don't even bother, Gordon. You're going to lose.
Here's a question for you. Does Judah Zachary not only cause Quentin to lift the knife, does he also stop him from destroying the painting?
Probably. If it messes with Barnabas and Julia, he made it happen.
Right.
I don't think anyone has any free will in the future at all.
Yeah.
In fact, Judah Zachary is kind of like the supercomputer in Harlan Ellison's short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
Yeah.
He's just all hate. It's like, if I can mess with you for however long, I'll do it. And when it ends, I'll just keep repeating it. And there's a quote from that story where it's like, on every atom of every centimeter of every, it's like, if you imprinted hate on every inch of every centimeter of every atom of my processor, that would not equal 1/millionth of the hate that I have for you. That's what Judah Zachary is. He's just like, I don't like as much as I want to get rid of this whole branch of the family, I'm going to make them suffer.
Yeah.
Like the viewers of Kill the Moon.
Yeah, basically.
Anyway, I know you like that Doctor Who shout out. I did my research. Yeah, I agree. I think the way you really make Judah Zachary mad is you leave his box in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get hot in there. My God, he doesn't get little shades he can put down?
Or you put like a big clown wig on his head.
What I want to know is, like in a magic act, if they put a shroud over it, could it be the head of a tiger? Instead, like it turned the lady into a tiger? Jewel, answer us.
Well, here's the thing. Futurama should have had a Judah Zachary head.
Oh, yeah.
It
was a big... Judah Zachary's actually... This is true. It was actually a big influence on my comic book, Elvis Shrugged, because the main villain in that is a head in a glass case. Cool. It's the severed head of Colonel Tom Parker, who's shouting out commands and all that. And that was a Dark Shadows shout-out.
And you know what I'm thinking now, just because I'm kind of loopy right now. What if the severed head of Nixon in Futurama was just Judah Zachary in disguise?
There you go. I like that.
Or not Phil Collins in disguise. See, he looks like Phil Collins.
Well, that's deliberate because you go, is he Nixon or is he Phil Collins?
I've asked that question for years. I asked when I would see Nixon, I would say, "Is that Phil?" And when I would see Phil, I would ask, "Is that Richard Nixon?"
Now let me ask: if you actually met Richard Nixon, would you approach him and say, "Hey, can you sing a few bars of "In the Air Tonight" to prove your real identity"?
Yes.
You gotta make him sing Studio. Just for the hell of it.
Studio.
What's you guys' favorite part of 1970, we'll say?
Probably my conception.
Before they go back to 1840, we'll say.
Well, I mean, I talked about this.
Oh, you said the flag.
Yeah, I think that whole the two episodes that lead straight into 1840.
Jesus God, yes.
Because
that's Dark Shadows at its most epic.
Yeah, because it's like, and and I'm not sure where it fits, but it starts with Julia taking the staircase. No, actually, it was at last. It was like the second to last. It's Julia takes the staircase. Barnabas is held back, and then further on into the 1840, when Barnabas decides, oh, okay, I'm going to go back, and Stokes is like doing the I Ching. But yeah, those two episodes, because it's like the episode with the zombie attack is basically the writer saying, okay, there's no going back here. We're not going to give you a happy out. We're not going to give you that, and most drama will do that. They'll give you an escape clause. It's like, okay, if you touch this button, you can go back, or if you grab this thing, this will happen. It's basically Dark Shadow saying, okay, it's basically ride or die with Dark Shadows at that point.
There is no Spider-Man, no way home button that they can press to make the bad guys go away.
Yeah. With Judah Zachary, we do see one. We know Angelique's been in the occult. We know there was a lawyer who was in the occult. Are there surviving members of Judah's cult still out there today, you think, Gordon?
Yeah, I can see, I think with any cult, and we can see this in the past 10 years, the one that was founded by a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. There are people who've publicly left and who've denounced it, but there are people who still believe in that heavily. I think there are. I'm sure that, and I'm one of the threads that if I were ever, if I could go back in time and be showrunner for Dark Shadows. I mean, first thing I would do is just go, make sure, renegotiate contracts and make sure, like, hey, Fred, you want to do more stuff than Barnabas? Yeah, we'll do it. But I'd love to have like a war in present day Collinwood.
Yeah.
One side is there are two acolytes of Judah Zachary. One is kind of trying to make friends with and with the family within, because they think, okay, we'll destroy them from within. That's the best way I serve my master. The other one is doing external stuff with them. Maybe it's sending acolytes after them. Maybe it's external. And they're thinking, hey, this is how I best serve my master. Because then you could bring in James Storm, and maybe the one who is the person who's trying to destroy the family from within, to follow something Patrick suggested, that's the James Storm character. Yeah. That's the new Mayo Collins, who's like, hey, Roger's off trying to, he keeps smashing these glasses, so he's got to buy some new frosted glass. And maybe go to AA because he's been down in that brandy a little too much. He's leaving his own son. Where you've got that power struggle, but then you also have to deal with the threat within, and the fine details we'd have to figure out. But I think doing that would be it's no longer. You could suggest that maybe 1995 doesn't happen the way it does, but you then bring the threat through. Every year can be 1995.
Well, can I devil's advocate a little bit on this?
Sure.
I love that. I think there's another way that it could go also, where the one trying to destroy them from within is someone who is being advised by a new psychologist that the incredible scarring that he has, to his psyche, is something for which Roger and Liz need to be answerable. Mm-hmm. And it's David. Mm-hmm. And that the psychiatrist is Judah Zachary. And that he is, in a very real world sense, trying to manipulate David into finding yet another way to take down the Collinses. That James Storm is the red herring. Mm-hmm. That we think it's him. No, it's David. And because it just makes sense. I mean, my God, after all that you go through, look at how bitter the little guy is when we start the show. And then, he's had two ghosts try and kill him. And, the other thought, and this is a little bit of a parade rainer, but it's also a sad note of realism to mix into the fantasy. And it's this. If there were a thriving cult of Judah Zachary, would he really have so little to do as to obsess on the destruction of the Collinses? Or does he again turn his attention inward because at some point the last member of the cult of Judah Zachary died?
Here's what I would like to see is secretly, just because Judah's head, whatever, after Gerard got shot, was destroyed.
Yeah.
There was always a backup plan to bring him back. There was always another way they could have brought him back. But the cult, instead of doing it right away, waited and waited and waited. So you see a lawyer is a part of the cult. Normal men and women, lawyers, doctors, teachers, they're out there. You don't know who they are necessarily, but they're a part of the cult. And you would see these people gathered at the Irish headstone, and you would see this black woman in this black robe, and she pulls back this black robe, and it's Laura Parker, but it's not Angelique. And she has this snake, and she cuts the head off the snake, and it would bring back Judah Zachary.
She cut the head off.
Yeah,
I kind of like Patrick's idea better.
I do too.
Well, for one key reason is that around the early 70s, like 72, 73, there's kind of you had all these weird little, like self-help movements, and it led to like a kind of revival of psychiatry and psychoanalysis. So
Okay, okay.
What?
I'm okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
That was the big bestseller of that.
Mm-hmm. So I think that would fuel in. And I think also what you could even do if you wanted to be, if you want to decide, okay, you can't think of anything new, you've got a whole cult that lost its leader thanks to a magazine writer throwing him off a cliff.
Yeah.
So they kind of start going, okay. And so they fall in love with the idea of Judah Zachary more than the actual man. So he's dead, but they're like, okay, we're going to live up to this guy's teachings.
Yeah.
Because, we tried, we failed, and we put all our time into this creature thing. And you make it clear it's the human acolytes. It's not the actual Leviathans. It's the people who lose their faith in one thing, trying to substitute another thing for it. And I've always thought that if you were to do this and say, and all apologies to Mark Perry if you're planning to do this as part of your next generation, but if you were to do if I were to do the Leviathans now, I would have them be the acolytes of some kind of tech startup guru. Because I did a lot of work with startups, and a lot of them are like more convinced about how awesome they are than actually providing results. So don't think Elon Musk or big billionaires, but just guys who are like, hey, I've got this cool new way of doing things, and I'm a high powered coach. Think Tony Robbins, except evil.
Right.
But that's my take, and I don't think you could do it in the 70s. I think you'd have to.
Looks a little like Jim Pearson. Continue.
I'm not going to argue with you on that because I do agree with you.
It's a physical thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. I was hoping you were going to say some sort of techno guru type figure because it's perfect. The other thought I had, and this is a way, because you mentioned about the cult leader thrown off the cliff by a magazine publisher. Although I think Sky's magazine was highlights for children, and it was still a challenging piece for him. Honey, I still don't understand what I'm publishing, but I'm going to keep publishing it. but all seriousness aside, that that there is some figure that they keep seeing, this cloaked figure with the golden mask. We forget about that great golden mask of Judah Zachary. It's lots of great props. And that at some point Carolyn finds him and confronts him and rips it off, and it's Jeb.
Yeah.
And the cultists put the mask of Judah Zachary on Jeb, and what brought him back to life. And what a bizarre fusion that would be. I have no idea where they would go with it, but it's scary as hell.
Yeah, it would be creepy. That's the thing too with cults. Just because somebody publicly denounces they're no longer a part of a cult, that doesn't really mean anything, because secretly what somebody does and what publicly somebody does tends to be two different things.
Well, you also have to keep in mind, it's when you're talking about moving away from a cult,
right?
A lot of it is it's not just, hey, I quit. You're also dealing with the programming, the programming that goes on. Like, there's a great documentary called Going Clear. It's available. It was on HBO, and you've got these people who, and one of them was actually, I think, John Travolta's assistant, and she was like, she's talking about how she was pregnant, she was given crappy food, she was working all the time, and I think all she wanted to do was to see her sick mom, and they said no, and she's like, I'm out of here. So it's not just saying one thing and doing another. It's really realizing, like, it's like the way some people are about religion. It's like, I can't, I don't mind disclosing, and it's going to get a little deep, so get out your shovels. I would describe myself religiously as a recovering Catholic. I went to a Catholic grammar school, a Jesuit high school, and a Jesuit college. And I went to a public college for a year or so. One of the great things about getting a Jesuit training is that it shows you just how much full of inconsistencies and, like, are you kidding me stuff there is in Catholicism.
Oh yeah, there's no cure for certain types of religion than exposure to the religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Dark Shadows. Man, have you watched this Dark Shadows? It's a great show. It's free on Tubi. There's like vampires and ghosts. And in one episode, Louis Edmonds. What?
And crazy reverends.
Right. And one episode, Louis Edmonds actually recites the lyrics to Paranoid, finished with my woman because she couldn't help me with my mind. People say I'm insane because I am frowning all the time.
His woman was Bruno. Anyway.
And for those of you who are still watching, thank you. We really appreciate it.
He killed Bruno with a phallic object. Okay, you studied Freud.
The real interesting thing with Dark Shadows is it wasn't just the warlocks, like Judah. It wasn't just the Judah Zacharys, the Angeliques, the Barnabases, the Kalmpatofes, the Phoenixes that were the danger. It was the Gabriels who were in the wheelchair. They were the. It was those other people who you had to watch out for, the killers that you weren't sure that were the killers. Because here's Gabriel, he's in a wheelchair, and he's got this ball, and he's squeezing it. And then when he gets up out of the wheelchair and he's choking people, it's like, Jesus, man.
He is risen.
Right. Right. How creepy was Christopher Pennock as Gabriel?
It was magnificent. And I think that was Pennock's favorite part to play, because not only did he get to be menacing, not only did he have that heartbreaking monologue about, this is why I did it, so you would keep loving me and keep taking care of me. And I know adults who are like that. But he's also funny. He's one of those characters like Nicholas Blair who kind of sees everything for how it is and says it. I think you got, you got Bill Malloy, you got Nicholas Blair, you got Count Patofi, and Gabriel. on drums.
What did you think of Gabriel?
I thought he was a really good villain, and I think Dark Shadows has always had a great mix of not only the big threats, but like basically evil people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like soap operas at that time, the most evil was the person who had the affair with somebody's husband, or someone who was blackmailing. I mean, a guy who gets up out of a wheelchair and chokes someone, you didn't normally see that. And I think usually, I mean, Dark Shadows is a very it knows when to go into shades of gray, and it knows when to go, okay, maybe we don't go all in on this. Maybe we need to back off a bit. But I think at this point in the show's history, they're like, hey, dude, we're going for it. You know, I think to use a very popular parlance, and please excuse the, I don't give, I have no more bleeps to give. My
Right.
bleep garden is barren. They just didn't, and I don't think it was anger or dissatisfaction, although I'm sure that like whenever he'd miss a golf putt in his office, Dan Curtis would down some Jaeger shots and yell at his writers to crank it up more. I think they probably knew that the series was on shaky ground, so just like, we have to, what are we trying to prove? Let's just go for it.
Yeah, that's actually a little bit of a misconception from what I understand, because it does kind of throw the series into a slightly different light. The ratings weren't that bad.
Well, I would assume that maybe they weren't that bad, but I'm sure the network was putting pressure. I mean, yeah,
and
so they're
I
probably like,
we're out of ideas.
Yeah.
Which is why in my fantasy, they would have moved the show to LA and gotten, Richard Matheson or David Gerald or somebody like that to take over as the new showrunner with Dan as producer, but at least filming it in LA. And get some genre people in there, since genre television was really coming into an ascendancy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have done a lot for the show. And the 70s, man, if they had just gotten to make it a couple of years, which when you think of other soap operas, I mean, those things go through everything. But if they had just made it to the early part of the 70s with Hal Lindsey and The Omen and The Exorcist and all of the other stuff that what a great era for horror. Dark Shadows would have had a real shot in the arm.
Hell, they should have had someone like eavesdropping on Rod Serling when he was negotiating with Universal for Night Gallery. Yeah. Hell, you know that there's this one writer on the Twilight Zone who was dead for 5 years, but you could easily talk to his widow, and that's Charles Beaumont, because his stuff would be tailor made for Dark Shadows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything you guys want to add for 1995, 1970, 1840?
It's uncomfortably dark. It's difficult to watch.
Yeah.
And it is like those first few belts of scotch that you have when you're 8. It's like those first few, let's be realistic. I'm sorry. It's like those first few belts of scotch you have when you're 12. It's harsh. It tastes like the inside of an ashtray, but it is part of maturing. It's part of growing up, and the show is growing up, and that's not always pretty, but it makes it a fascinating, dark, deep, compelling part of the show that properly ends it, because Barnabas and Angelique do get the better of it, even if there is a horrible price. And I love that about it, because, we talk about this, and of course the implication is to talk a little bit about 1840, and that everything is leading us towards the reconciliation of Barnabas and Angelique, which I love. And that's another topic that I think is very worth talking about, but not tonight.
No.
Mm-hmm. I think, looking at the 1995 flashback just in Solo and going into the 1970 pre-1840 sequence, I've never watched, like Patrick said, it's a tough watch, But there is such a sense of the present in there.
Yes.
Not just the present of 1970, but it feels like that sequence could have easily been made in 2022.
Hell yes.
Yep.
Yes, that's a
And
great observation.
It's one of those that it's like, it's not something I would like necessarily start a person watching with. I want to send them, so here, start season 1, episode 1, and just do a Patrick McCray, watch the whole thing in sequence. But I think this is where it kind of goes. It's the point where it's the start of the show's third act. And it's gripping. You can't keep your eyes off it. You can't stop watching it. But it's also it's so rich. And I think you kind of wish that the show could have continued when you know that the show's going to end in less than a year. You kind of wish they could have kept that up for at least the duration of it.
Yes. Jewel, say what you're going to say, but I have something I want to throw in when I can.
For a show that isn't really in 1995, to me, it captures the essence of what 1995 was, because I grew up in the late 80s or 90s. Dark Shadows really nails 1995 in a lot of ways.
Nice.
Because it's horrific, it's gritty, it's dirty, but it's beautiful at the same time, and it is scary. And the 90s was scary,
Gordon, I thought of something, and this is
good. Thinking's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
We met in 1995.
Yeah, because we were
on Prodigy.
Yeah, because I think you and I were like, just to give everyone background, I think Patrick and I were like the only people as part of the same Dark Shadows group who didn't grow up with the show. So we would make like snide comments. Like, I remember one of my favorite comments of Patrick's was Craig Slocum rather than none.
Did I say that?
Yes, you did. Because at one point we were in chat and
Slocum than never.
Right. Because we're in a chat, and at one point it just got to the fact that, and we were just being ridiculous, and you had all these older people kind of like reacting like, what's your problem? Do you even like Dark Shadows?
We loved it. We loved it intensely.
Right. But we could make fun of it.
At a different time in America. And so we had a different relationship with it.
Right. Yeah, we were, neither one of us, I mean, at most, I think I might have remembered, I'm working on an essay for a different book, so I'm just talking about my television habits as a kid. And I thought I remembered seeing the introductory like waves, the introductory titles, and that grandfather clock. But I think that grandfather clock I was confusing with a classic Doctor Who story where the villain's time machine is shaped like a grandfather clock, and I think it's like the same general model.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on one thing if I can.
Go right ahead.
And
just do it in private though. We don't want to see you touching your one thing.
I exactly. Better Slocum than never. The thing I was gonna say is, you talked about the immersive project I did, which I think goes way beyond what do they call it nowadays? It's some really indulgent term when you watch. Binge. I hate that term, because what I did with Dark Shadows was a hell of a lot more than a binge. I mean, it was a true, 10-hour a day job. 6 days a week. It was a hell of a thing, and it's 1995 and Ragnarok and 1840 came at an amazing time in all of that, because if you do something like that, technology and everything else and just the pressures of real life will mess you up. And it's not as easy, even though it sounds easy, it's not as easy as it sounds to have that kind of discipline with one show and to try and maintain any kind of life. And so by the time 1995 rolls around, you're exhausted. You are physically exhausted. You've lost sleep. You are drained in so many ways. You've gotten close to the characters in ways that you never thought you would, because basically you've been living at Collinwood, with them as the only voices that you really encounter for the most part. It's beyond kind of a Stockholm syndrome. It was a really profound experience in my life, and that just as you are physically reaching your most exhausted and most haggard, so is the show. And just as you are kind of unair conditioned and, oily and sweaty and tired of this, but you're just determined to go through with it, so are Barnabas and Julia. And it reflects the experience so eerily. And that's something I haven't really talked about, is what that watch-through experience was like. And that was a big part of it. I mean, when they take Maggie away, you're ready to go with her. I remember watching that late at night, where 10 hours of television somehow took me 14 hours, and you're just dead on your feet. And that was an exhaustive and exhausting way to watch the show, but I wouldn't trade it, because it added such a weird physical dimension. It's like runners when they get to that last mile, and they're, I won't say I lost control of my body functions, but I lost control of the body functions of the soul. And as gross as that sounds, it's kind of the most accurate thing I can say about that. It was a hell of an experience, and 1995 came at a very specific time in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Guys, I want to thank you for coming on and joining me and talking 1995 with me.
Mm-hmm.
Really good. This was a good one. I mean, hell, we got an hour and 45 minutes out of one of the shortest time periods on the show. That's saying a lot. I think, and it's the second time, Jewel, you and I have talked about it, and I don't think we covered any old ground.
No.
So thank you for that.
I think that's the thing. 1995, for 9 episodes, it's one of the most memorable 9 episodes you'll ever experience. It's everything. It's one of the Dark Shadows. The one thing Dark Shadows keeps doing with itself is, just when you think it can't shock you, go watch 1995, and I guarantee you, your jaw will be on the ground and it'll stay there.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful and heartbreaking to watch at the same time.
1995 is when Dark Shadows puts all its poker chips on the table and says, "We are all in."
Yeah. And here's the beautiful part about it too. It ain't bluffing either.
Oh, and let me just, before we formally end, this lovely shirt is part of the Unlovely Frankenstein collection on tpublic.com. Order it. Be sure to also sign up for the newsletter, because they have semi-regular sales. So they have all sorts of other cool stuff. My friends at Rock's Geek, who are performing August 12th at the Newport Theater, have you can get T-shirts and coffee mugs and stickers and all that. But Unlovely Frankenstein, he's got some wonderful collections. I'm wearing this because I know, Jewel, you're a fan of the Shadow, and I assume other pulp literature, and would love to talk to you about it sometime. And I just figured, hey, I don't mind doing the self-promotion thing. So
there will be many links to where you can get the Dark Shadows book, obviously, as always. Link to where you can get Gordon's pulps on Amazon, and there will be a link to Unlovely Frankenstein where you can get that T-shirt.
Done by my boss.
Wallace McBride. Huge shout out to him. Gordon, thank you, man. Patrick, thank you. You guys are always a pleasure, man.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for us too.
Good night, all.
Much.
Good night. See you guys.
Good night, all.